What you are about to hear broke every rule that professional tennis has ever written for itself. Not on the court. Not during a match. Not after a trophy presentation or a championship speech. Before any of that. Before a single ball had been struck at Roland Garros. Before she had even cleared customs. Something happened at an international airport in Paris that stopped French journalists mid-sentence, overwhelmed train security personnel, and left a terminal full of ordinary travelers frozen in place, staring, completely unable to walk away from what was unfolding around them. And at the center of all of it, in the eye of the most extraordinary airport reception the French sports world has ever witnessed, was a 23-year-old girl from the Philippines. Smiling, moving through the chaos like she had been expecting every single second of it. The question that French broadcasters, sports journalists, and tennis insiders have been asking ever since is the same question you are probably asking right now. How does a tennis player cause this? Not a pop star. Not a football legend arriving home with a World Cup. Not a head of state with a motorcade and a security detail. A tennis player. A young woman with a racket and a seating number, stepping off a commercial flight into the arrivals hall of Charles de Gaulle Airport, and being received like the greatest thing France had seen in years. Because what happened that night was not just a crowd. What happened that night was a signal. Loud enough to rattle glass. Loud enough to stop airport workers mid-step. Loud enough that French reporters who have covered Grand Slam ceremonies and Champions League finals and presidential visits stood there in the terminal with their cameras rolling and their mouths open, completely at a loss for what category to put this moment in. Her name is Alexandra Eala. And if you do not already know that name, you are going to want to remember it. Because what is forming around this young woman is not a moment. It is not a story that peaks at an airport and fades quietly into the background once the tournament begins. It is the opening chapter of something that the world of tennis has genuinely never encountered before. And it is only getting bigger. But here is what nobody outside the Filipino community fully understood until that night. What descended on Charles de Gaulle Airport was not spontaneous. It was not a group of excited supporters who heard a flight number and rushed over with flags. What arrived at that terminal was weeks of organized, deeply intentional, continent-wide planning. Filipino communities from the suburbs of Paris to Marseille, from Lyon to Nice, from neighboring countries stretching across Europe, they had been coordinating for weeks before her plane ever left the ground. They arranged transportation across national borders. They ordered custom jerseys with her name and number. They imported thousands of blue, red, and yellow flags. They rehearsed synchronized chants with the precision of a military choir preparing for a national ceremony. They built, entirely from scratch on foreign soil, a homecoming for a player who was technically the visitor. French authorities had been informed. Officials prepared. By most accounts, the estimate was somewhere in the range of a few hundred supporters. A notable turnout for a tennis arrival, certainly larger than usual, but manageable. Something that could be absorbed into the normal flow of a busy international airport without disruption. What arrived made that estimate look almost embarrassingly small. Security had to be reinforced multiple times before her flight even touched down. And when it did, when word moved through the terminal that she was close, the sound that erupted was not the kind of cheering you hear when a favorite player wins a point. It was something deeper, something that had been compressed and stored for a very long time, finally released all at once, in the most public place imaginable. And then the doors opened and she walked through. Camera flashes detonated across the terminal in continuous white waves. Elderly supporters who had made 4-hour train journeys on a Tuesday night were pressed against the barriers in the front rows, holding handmade banners with 2 words, Laban, Alex. Fight, Alex. Children sat on their parents' shoulders staring at her with the wide-eyed silence that children reserve for someone they have only ever seen through a screen, someone who until this exact moment existed only as a legend and is now suddenly, impossibly, real. French journalists, people who have stood courtside at Grand Slam finals, who have covered World Cup victories and Olympic ceremonies, admitted afterward, some of them on live broadcast, that they had never in their professional lives seen an airport arrival like this for a tennis player. Not once. Not even close. One broadcaster searched for the right phrase and finally landed on this. A peaceful invasion of joy. That phrase spread faster than the footage itself, because it was accurate in a way that feels almost too precise. What entered Charles de Gaulle that night was not aggression. It was not disruption. It was not chaos. It was joy. Pure, organized, overwhelming, synchronized joy, directed with laser-like intensity at one single human being. But here is where the story goes far deeper than the spectacle. Here is what the flags and the drums and the shaking terminal windows cannot explain on their own. Because to understand why tens of thousands of people across an entire continent organized themselves around the arrival of a 23-year-old tennis player, you have to understand who Alexandra Eala actually is. Not just as an athlete, as a symbol, as a story that an entire nation has been quietly watching build for years, waiting for the moment it would finally be loud enough for the rest of the world to hear. She grew up in Quezon City. She found her way to the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, Spain, one of the most elite tennis development environments on earth, a program that does not produce players so much as it produces weapons, where her game was constructed from the ground up around three foundational qualities: relentless pressure, tactical intelligence beyond her years, and a mental composure that coaches at the academy described, in interviews, as almost unsettling for someone her age. Left-handed, fearless, engineered to dismantle opponents before they ever locate their rhythm, before they ever settle into the match, before they ever feel comfortable with what they are being asked to deal with from the other side of the net. She dominated at the junior level. The titles followed. The rankings climbed. But alongside the results, something else was building. Something that no ranking system and no official tournament record could measure or contain. A story was forming. And a nation, scattered across the world in airports and hospitals and construction sites and office buildings, was watching every single point of it unfold. Because this is the part that the pure sports analysis always misses. For Filipinos living abroad, overseas workers separated from their families by thousands of miles of ocean, communities built far from everything familiar, people who left home not because they wanted to but because they had to, sport has never been just sport. It never is for a diaspora. Sport becomes the thread that runs back across every mile of distance to something that still feels like where you belong. It becomes identity. It becomes proof. And when Alexandra Eala steps onto a court carrying the name of the Philippines, she does not step on alone. She carries the accumulated hope and longing and pride of millions of people who see in her journey something that mirrors their own: the distance traveled, the sacrifice made, the refusal to disappear. That is why the chants at Charles de Gaulle were not casual. That is why an elderly woman who had never attended a tennis match in her life made a 4-hour train journey on a work night to stand in a terminal and wave a flag for 30 seconds. That is why the phrase circulating online in the days before her arrival, 50,000 Pinoys ready, was never just a social media slogan. It was a declaration. It was an entire community announcing itself to a country that had no idea they were there, that they were this organized, that they were this powerful, that they were this ready. And now consider what all of this means for Roland Garros itself. Because this is the point in the story where the rest of the tennis world is only beginning to understand the full weight of what has arrived. France has one of the most sacred relationships with clay court tennis anywhere on earth. Roland Garros is not simply a tournament held in Paris. It is a cultural institution. The red dirt of the Bois de Boulogne is treated almost like a historical artifact, something that demands respect from every player who walks onto it, something that rewards patience and intelligence and physical endurance above almost everything else. French tennis crowds are passionate, absolutely. But they are passionate in a specifically French way. Knowledgeable. Measured. They appreciate the technical brilliance of a well-constructed point. They applaud cleanly. They do not roar for 90 consecutive minutes without pause. What has now arrived on their doorstep is something France has only ever previously experienced inside a Champions League football stadium, packed with 80,000 people who have been singing without stopping since before kickoff, who will keep singing until the final whistle regardless of the scoreline. That same velocity of human emotion, that same organized, relentless wall of sound intensity is now aimed at a single tennis player on a clay court. And tournament organizers are staring at a question that has no precedent in the history of this event. How do you manage a crowd that functions as a home audience for a player who is technically the visitor? How do you contain something that was never supposed to exist inside this tournament's borders? The answer, it turns out, is that you do not contain it. You step back and you watch it happen, and you hope you are recording everything, because nothing like it has ever been recorded before. But here is what cannot be allowed to get buried under the spectacle. Because beneath the flags and the synchronized chants and the shaking terminal ceiling, there is a competitive reality that every other player in this draw is now being quietly, urgently forced to take seriously. Alexandra Eala is not here as a feel-good story. She is not here as a symbol to be admired from a distance and then comfortably set aside once the actual tennis begins. She is here as a genuine, rapidly evolving, deeply dangerous threat to anyone who draws her name in the bracket. Her left-handed serve forces opponents into geometries and angles that are almost impossible to fully replicate in practice against right-handed partners. The kick serve to the ad court from a left-hander lands in a place the receiver's body is simply not trained to reach naturally. The disruption begins before the rally even starts. And it compounds as the match progresses, because the opponent who cannot solve the serve cannot solve the baseline game either, and the baseline game is where she does her most patient and most violent work. Patient and violent at the same time. That combination sounds contradictory until you watch it operate in real time. She waits. She constructs rallies with a chess player's precision, absorbing pace, redirecting pressure, drawing her opponent gradually toward the position she wants them in. And then the moment she senses the fraction of an opening she has been engineering the entire point, she attacks with a speed and precision that ends the rally before the opponent's body has finished calculating its response. On clay specifically, where the long baseline exchanges and physical endurance requirements reward exactly this type of disciplined, pressure-based game, analysts who have spent serious time studying her film have gone on record saying she is substantially more dangerous than her current ranking reflects. Several have made predictions about her Roland Garros potential that, 1 year ago, would have seemed wildly optimistic. Today, those predictions feel like they might actually be conservative. And then add the psychological dimension on top of all of that. Imagine being a player from France, competing at your home Grand Slam, on the most iconic clay surface in the world, in front of your home crowd, with your entire nation watching. You walk onto that court carrying everything that home advantage is supposed to give you: familiarity, comfort, support, the crowd's energy pulling you forward every time you need it. And then the noise hits you. And it is not coming from your side. The crowd that was supposed to be yours is completely overwhelmed, completely drowned out, by a wall of organized, thundering, synchronized support for the player standing across the net. Not hostile to you. Not booing. Something psychologically harder to manage than booing. A wall of pure, focused, unwavering noise aimed at someone else, sustained without break, drawing energy from itself, growing louder every time she wins a point. That is not a neutral environment. That is not a pressure you can prepare for in a practice session or simulate with a training partner. That is a weight that lands in the middle of a live Grand Slam match with no preparation time and no relief for as long as the match continues. Players who have faced home crowd disadvantage in other sports describe it as something that feels almost personal, as though the air itself has turned against you. And on a clay court, where matches routinely stretch to 2 and 3 hours, that psychological weight does not lighten with time. It compounds. Opponents at Roland Garros will not be playing Alexandra Eala. They will be playing Alexandra Eala and 50,000 voices standing behind her and every Filipino family watching from a phone screen on the other side of the world at 3 in the morning who stayed awake specifically because this moment matters. But the most revealing thing that happened that night at Charles de Gaulle, the detail that almost every person who watched the footage missed entirely because the crowd was too overwhelming to look past, was not the crowd at all. Go back and watch the footage again. This time, stop watching the crowd. Watch her. She has just completed a long international flight. The moment she steps through those doors, the noise hits her with the physical force of a wave. Thousands of people are screaming her name. Cameras are in her face before she has taken 10 steps. Children are crying. Elderly supporters are reaching toward her through the barriers. The terminal ceiling is vibrating. And she is calm. Not the stiff, controlled, gritted teeth composure of someone enduring an overwhelming situation. Not the professional performance of someone doing what they know is expected of them. Genuine, warm, deeply rooted calm. She moves through the crowd making actual eye contact with individual people, acknowledging specific banners, smiling with her eyes in a way that cannot be manufactured or performed on command, that only exists when a person is not spending themselves in a moment but actually receiving it, actually inside it, grateful for it, drawing something real from it. French sports observers kept returning to this specific detail in the days that followed. Journalists who have covered the very biggest names in global tennis across decades of Grand Slam events. And the word they kept reaching for was not professional. It was not composed. The word that kept surfacing independently from multiple different sources was regal, unshakable, the eye of the storm. That composure, in that environment, at that age, after that flight, surrounded by that level of organized human emotion, that is perhaps the most alarming signal she sent to the rest of the Roland Garros draw before she had touched a ball. Because it does not tell you she can handle pressure. Every professional tennis player can handle pressure in a training environment. What it tells you is something much more unsettling. It tells you the pressure does not cost her anything. It tells you the pressure is not a burden she is learning to carry. It tells you the pressure is something she consumes, something that feeds her rather than depletes her, something that sharpens her rather than scattering her focus. And if that is true on the court the way it was true in that terminal, and every piece of evidence suggests it is, then the players in this draw are not simply facing a difficult opponent. They are facing an opponent who becomes more dangerous the louder the moment gets. An opponent for whom Roland Garros, with its 50,000 Filipinos and its synchronized chants and its historic noise and its global spotlight, is not a pressure situation. It is a power source. So what does all of this mean? What does it mean that Charles de Gaulle Airport shook on a Tuesday night in Paris? What does it mean that veteran French journalists are still searching for language to adequately describe what they witnessed? What does it mean that tournament officials are quietly recalibrating their expectations for what Roland Garros crowds can look and sound like in the modern era? It means something genuinely new has entered European tennis. Not gradually, not through a quiet accumulation of results building slowly toward a tipping point, but suddenly, loudly, with enough force to vibrate glass and freeze airport workers mid-step and bring elderly people across 4-hour train journeys just to wave a flag in an arrivals hall for 30 seconds. A 23-year-old woman from Quezon City, shaped at one of the greatest academies in the sport, carrying the hope of an entire diaspora scattered across an entire continent, has walked through the doors of Roland Garros. And she did not tiptoe in. She did not arrive quietly. She did not slip through hoping to avoid the weight of expectation. She arrived with 50,000 people announcing her. She arrived with drums and flags and synchronized chants and glass shaking and French reporters standing speechless in a terminal trying to find words big enough for what they were watching. The rest of the draw is adjusting. The French media is still searching for the right language. And the 50,000 Pinoys who said they were ready, they were not performing. They were not exaggerating. They were telling the truth about what this young woman means, about what this moment means, about what it feels like when a community that has always cheered from a distance finally gets close enough to be heard. Paris noticed. The tournament noticed. The sport noticed. And if you think what happened at that airport is where this story peaks, if you think the most extraordinary chapter has already been written, then you have not been paying attention to where Alexandra Eala is actually going.